Assalamu alaikum. So typically with these let's be honest forums, they're a little bit more informal than a formal lecture. What we like to do is to leave it open to the audience to be able to do interaction and ask questions. But particularly what I wanted to start out talking about today, as we look at the different topics that are considered taboo in our community, one of the issues that I see consistently coming up with both adults and with the youth is this idea of a sort of cognitive dissonance. And what that means is that our beliefs or our behaviors aren't necessarily matching with what we think, right? Let me translate that a little further. So what we see sometimes reported by both adults and the youth is that they come to the mosque and there's one set of expectations and around from their behavior, their dress, their interactions with one another, and then they leave the mosque and then there's a whole other set of expectations and realities that they're confronting that have nothing to do with the same expectations that they just experienced when they were at the mosque. And this dissonance, this difference between the two creates a sort of double life. It creates a reality that's hard to sort of reconcile one with the other and be true to themselves. And so it's important that we actually start discussing this issue so that both parents and the youth can find ways of changing that behavior, changing those set of behaviors and that reality for our youth and our families. Because when that becomes a reality, then there's a disjointed experience that happens between the families, and the parents are left wondering, why is my child acting this way? And the children are wondering, why do my parents not understand what's going on in my life? And so it's important that we learn to build the bridge and understanding around what's happening within our community. So that's my hot topic issue that I would like to discuss, but I'm also open to discussing whatever other taboo topics are on your mind right now. Because in this forum we've discussed everything from disagreements between parents to things like sex and sexuality and pornography, things like that. So whatever it is that you wanted to discuss today as a community, I'm open to. But this was my beginning idea. So who wants to start? Let me ask the youth, do you guys identify with what I was just talking about?
What? She said we identify. We was just talking about it. Yeah, for being disconnected from religious.
Having like two sort of identities and realities. Like
She was just, you guys are so mean. You guys are so rude. Okay, that was me.
That's okay, we'll come back to you guys. You're on the hot seat just yet. Let me start here and then we'll start.
One of the ideas that comes to my mind is friendship between genders, like especially when the children of my grandchildren are in high school and they do not know whether it's haram to talk to the other gender or something like that. They kind of get confused, and the parents are also not very clear about it. This is haram, this is halal, but we do not go further in how to communicate and build relationships, and I believe this is important to clarify.
Right, that's a really great point, right? Because depending on what culture we're coming from as we approach this phenomenon in America, what are the boundaries? What's acceptable, what's okay, and how do we navigate that? And this is a great question actually for our scholars to answer more than myself. I can tell you some of the how-to of communication, but Sheikh Azam is more qualified in this realm to give you more of the boundaries of what's permissible and what's not permissible. I mean, generally we want to promote good relations, right, that are sound in terms of the boundaries. But Sheikh Azam, would you like to say something?
We'll do another session for that.
Okay, so we'll table that, but it's an important session that we need to have, right? So that's a good point. So that's maybe something that we need to plan for the session that talks specifically just about that. And brother, you had a question?
So what is the terminology that you use? That's cognitive.
Oh, cognitive dissonance. Mhm.
So maybe I didn't really get that, or I did it, but I need more simplified.
Sure, I'm
example.
sorry, yeah.
So can you just give an example so we may know what's...
Right, so an example might be where our youth come into this space and they are expected to separate themselves out from gender, so the boys are with the boys and the girls are with the girls. They're expected to have a certain language, not including things like profanity and things like that. They are expected to cast their eyes down, and they are expected to be respectful of their elders and all of those things that we know to be familiar and values of ours, right? But when they leave here, maybe even as soon as a half an hour later, they're in another environment at maybe a Starbucks or something like that, where boys and girls or young women and young men freely interact with each other. That segregation doesn't exist. The language changes. Even what's permissible in terms of their interaction with one another changes. Whereas we value no relations before marriage in our environment. That's a value, and it's also, something we believe. Outside of this environment, we know that's not the case, right? There was research that came out of the Family Youth Institute in Michigan, which they did a survey of our youth and found that many of our Muslim college students are having sex before marriage. And so that's not happening. So there's a cognitive dissonance. We value this, we say we value it as a community, but how it's translating out into their actual experience is something different. Which is not to say that that's never going to happen, but why is it now such a high percentage of our children are doing that, right? So the value itself is somehow getting lost. And many people are not aware that that's even happening. Asi?
I guess I'll just open this bag of cats. That's a joke on purpose. Dating, I think saying that getting to know someone of the opposite gender, right, for marriage is okay, right? But the way we sort of speak about it and saying that dating is haram tends to drive youth away and tends to make Islam and all of this sort of seem out of place and backwards or not appropriate for the time in which we live. Because, of course, marrying someone which you don't know for our youth is something that's scary. But it's also, so it's sort of speaking on this whole, subject, if you will.
Right. And I think that's a great point, Wasi, and just the word dating, right? Yeah. How do we define that word, right? And I think that's a good starting place, because like back in the 1950s and 60s in America, when they said date, like I'm going on a date, what that meant was people went to a diner and they had milkshakes with each other, french fries and stuff, and sometimes within a group of people, but it wasn't anything having to do with sex at all, right? Nowadays, when you hear the word date, like somebody's dating, it usually implies sex is involved. And so that's a good place to start. What do we mean when we say dating? If what we mean when we say dating is that these people are just meeting for the purposes of getting to know one another, and maybe they're meeting in a public space, then maybe that's okay, right? Because they're not doing anything that's violating our norms. But it just depends. I mean, that's a good place of starting. How would you, as a young person, define dating?
Okay.
Well, if you want to, it's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I don't exactly know because don't really want to.
Dissonance.
We're not asking whether you like it or not.
That's the thing though, is that like I've never piqued interest into it, so I never really thought about it.
So it's not something that they're thinking about now, but at some point, it is an interest that you pursue, and we have to sort of speak about it openly and in a way that conforms with our Islamic ethics and principles. And doing that is better than not speaking about it at all.
That's right.
Sometimes when these things tend to be happening, we are very much deflective, or sometimes we sort of brush these topics under the rug and expect it to happen at some point. And I think dating specifically is one of those issues, or marriage, where we do seem to lose young people, because at that point it seems all of this seems unrealistic in the world in which we live.
Right, and I like your framing of it, because it's a solution-oriented framing, right? If we define what dating is in our particular value system so that we can support and maintain the value that we have, then that can only be helpful and fruitful, right? Because part of what gets lost when we don't discuss these things is the value itself. If we don't have structures in place to support the value system that we say we have, then we can't expect those values to continue. And within a very short time frame, the values will cease to continue. And that's what we see starting to happen.
Because in my mind, this is not backed by any research or any sort of findings, but what tends to happen is when we ignore these subjects, we do end up with situations in the statistics you're talking about young Muslims having premarital sex, having it outside the bounds of marriage, and other things sort of happening outside the mosque. And speaking about it and actually creating an avenue for young people to meet each other, to get to know one another in a healthy Islamic environment would be the solution, and be able to, I think, handle this.
Right, and in truth, sex and sexuality in our community is not it's a private matter in terms of what happens between two people. It is not, once people start engaging in sex though, however, that ceases to become a private matter. It's a public matter. That's why our marriages are public, so that everyone knows that this is what's taking place. But you know, that kind of activity, that behavior, it's not a completely private matter. Yes, sorry.
The other thing is the word usage that we use, because I notice people when they come here from different cultures, they say dating is fun, blah 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 blah. You say respectable courtship. All Muslims know what you're talking about. We use those two words. And I think it's really important as parents that we need to be involved with our kids instead of shying away from the topic. From a young age, we need to be involved with them, teaching them the correct way to get married, and help them get married and stay with them every step along the way, instead of assuming that they're going to go into haram and just like completely being absent when they do need us to help them get married. Really important for parents.
Right, it's a really good point. It's something I encounter frequently, is that fine balance of, as parents, learning to be the guide on the side versus the over-the-top parent where they're like standing over them every step of the way, right? We have to shift as their kids get older, and little by little balance and shift toward being that guide on the side, as opposed to being what has been termed now, right, the helicopter parent, or, you know, because they have to also learn to be self-determined in the sense that all of us, and them included, if we all walked out of here today and walked across the street and got hit by a car, right, we would stand before Allah with our own sins, them included, right? So they have to learn how to be accountable for their own selves. And part of the way we do that is by, as they get older, start little by little becoming the guide on the side as opposed to telling them what to do so that they can figure it out.
Besides the taboo topic, there are some other issues that do come to young adults. For example, today you read about some book with some classical book for some Shakespeare, for example. Although it's too old, but even in that could come discussion here where adults and the young students, which may not be part of their curriculum, come and talk about it. Which is beyond, the topic that somehow have attracted your attention or something like that.
No, if I am understanding you correctly, are you talking about the importance of the interaction between the elders and the youth? Or did you mean something different?
Importance of the elders and youth, or some topics which could be open to youth as well as elders. For example, movie guides, guidelines, or even TV guidelines, they rate them. Adults mature with parents and something like that.
Right, being more actively involved in that, because we have talked about this previously, but it's also a good point. What our children are taking in terms of their media, whether it be movies or TV or social media.
And perhaps, if you move further, Islamic Church or Islamic say, group in USA can occasionally write to them and point their view or opinion. To media about such topics as TV ratings or that are current on TV as well as on movie. For example, Sunday evening or Sunday discussion thing of the press, public, non-public, and these could be talked about. They are a little bit more mature than these elementary things. Relative elementary.
Right, I mean, and that's a good point as well, right? Because I know like sometimes we'll show movies here at the center for families, I think, right? And those movies will be appropriate, they'll be screened to be appropriate, but then when our youth leave here, they go out and see all kinds of movies, right?
So if there's some such thing on TV, a topic on TV, or even on radio, bring it up, let the people come and talk about it afterwards.
Right, because having that critical discussion and interaction is how we connect and learn and
open them to the related people.
Right. Anyone else?
I have a question. What happened to the young professionals that attend Islamic schools, then they go to college, away from their homes, and they feel independent. And then when they come home, they get a job, and they feel more independent because of their paycheck, and then they want to go and live on their own, including girls. So I would like to ask you, what's your take on that?
What are you asking me exactly?
Okay, those are 5 questions.
Well,
I mean, yes, this occurs, and it's not just
Correct.
because of their paycheck, right? In the in our current higher
Islamic
education system, we promote liberalism, which promotes individualism, and so knowing that, we have to find a way to balance our identity as a collective, because we tend to value more collectivism in our community. We have to figure out how do we balance promoting our value of that, while at the same time, every step of the way of their educational system, individualism is being promoted. So how do we balance that out as family and community, so that when they come out of that system, they still have a collective identity? That's a hard one to balance. but it's a discussion that we need to have because that's real and that's really happening. Because we don't have these discussions like Wasi was mentioning, oftentimes our youth start making decisions that they wouldn't necessarily make if they had other options. So the guy who may get out of school and then get a paycheck and goes and lives with a woman, maybe his family's telling him you can't get married until you have a job in place and an education and all these things. If we said to them, well, you can get married when you're younger because we did that and it worked for us, then they may not make that decision, you know? We have to give them options that they can live with. They're human beings too, and they have to be able to. And the other thing we need to promote with them is that you are going to make mistakes because all of us did. We all make mistakes. We're human beings. You can repent and get back up, and we don't teach that enough. What we teach more often is you have to get everything right or you're a failure. We expect perfectionism or you're a failure. That's not what we are about as a people. We are about, we sin, we repent, we follow up bad deeds with good deeds, we get back up. We're not promoting that enough.
That's a very good point. Very, very good point. Thank you for saying that.
I guess a follow-up to the discussion, one of the themes that keeps coming up is that there a lot of times tends to be two identities almost. What do you see as the role of the mosque or the Islamic Center in addressing that? What can we do to make sure
that's
that...
like a multi-pronged question or answer solution, but one of them is to open up the topic into what we would call a safe space, so that the youth feel comfortable sharing with the adults, right? And part of that is adults being ready to hear whatever the youth have to say. They may not be comfortable with it, and if they're not, they kind of have to step back and say, I'm not really ready for this conversation myself. Let me be prepared before I step into that space. Because if the adults come in and have an overreaction emotionally to what the youth are saying, that's not going to work either, right? So it's both sides have to be prepared. The adults have to be prepared to hear what the youth might have to present, but the youth have to be courageous enough to put forward, this is what's going on, this is my reality. You know, my adult daughter, when she was in high school, she had gone to Islamic schools all her life until high school. She went to a public school because she was an athlete and she wanted to play sports. But in so doing, it was kind of a cultural shock because she saw things she'd never seen before. And literally, things like a guy with a coat on campus, you know, kind of, you've seen like this in movies with watches and stuff, but like, you know, here I have a buffet of drugs, you know, that you can take, and not illicit drugs necessarily, but prescription drugs, because one of the popular things on campus is to give out, you know, drugs that are typically given for ADD because it helps hyper-focus you for an exam, for example. But what our kids don't know is that if you take that drug and you don't have ADD, you can become suicidal. So, you know, there's a lot to be, I mean, I was grateful that my daughter was telling me about this, right? But that didn't happen in a vacuum. That happened with years of, you know, creating that relationship so that she could come and tell me that. And she didn't tell me everything. I mean, I'm finding out things now that happened in high school that she didn't tell me until now. So, you know, it's a constant working relationship. But they have to feel comfortable coming to you, and you have to be ready to receive what they have to say.
I was just going to add to that, as parents, we need to be approachable. Like
Right.
our children need to feel comfortable talking to us, otherwise they're going to shut us down.
Right, exactly.
And we're going to be the ones who lose, and our kids are going to be the ones who
Right.
lose, and it will be our fault.
Perhaps when these kids or even young adults, they see those, they read about a book or they see TV or movie, they talk about themselves at home.
I think he also had a question, but
Assalamu alaikum. I think even if we raise our children, youths very, very well, uh, I think we understand that there is a widespread drinking habit within the youths. And so my son or daughter may go on a date with another boy or girl, and then at the lunch or dinner date, the other person will say, okay, which alcohol do you want to drink? And it is so widespread that our children and youths are kind of realizing that not that the other party is not going to take alcohol, but what level of alcohol. You know, if someone is taking alcohol and not getting drunk, and someone is getting drunk and someone is getting addicted, so they are classifying different levels and saying that, okay, if someone is drinking but not getting drunk or getting addicted, there is no other option. So that is becoming kind of acceptable and kind of, okay, legalizing, or that is a very difficult situation for our youths and for the parents. So see if you can say something on that.
Well, I mean, I think it brings to the forefront a good discussion that we need to be having, like, why is that happening, right? So if I take my own life, for example, I wasn't born Muslim. I wasn't born into a Muslim family, right? I became Muslim in college. And yet, I myself, I've never had alcohol. I've never tried drugs, except for the secondary smoke that we get on the streets out here. But that's never been a part of my existence, right? And I wasn't raised in a Muslim family. So what is it about our community right now that is not allowing for that same phenomenon to happen? I don't think that I was alone in that, is what I'm saying. That, outside of our community, there are plenty of people who are not engaging in those activities. So what is that fault in our community that's not working well in our system that we need to fix? And that's not a question that I can answer by myself. That's a question that we have to answer as a collective. Because it's not just one thing. I suspect it's many things, right? One is, often I've seen, is an assumption that our kids just don't do that because they know better. But that's not their reality. Their reality is being involved with kids from all kinds of backgrounds who have different values. And oftentimes when our kids are raised in the Islamic schools, they also are not confronted with, until high school, how to deal with the challenges of somebody challenging their values, right? And if there's not a solid foundation there of how to do that, it's easy for that to be corrupted, right? If their circle are not other Muslims who have the same values and so forth. So it's a larger discussion, but it's a discussion that all of you have to participate in. It can't be myself, or one expert, or even Sheikh Azam telling everyone how to do it, because giving the guidance is one thing. It's like the saying that we can lead the horse to the water, but we can't make it drink. We can give you some overarching ideas, but the collective has to all go to the pond, right? We have to do this together. Salam.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is that we have been fed this notion that we're supposed to create an Islamic utopia, that everybody is pure and everybody is clean, and that we don't have an ego and so on and so forth. But the reality is, actually the Quran talks a lot about ego, and talks about falling into despair, and talks about depression, and so there's a big disconnect from our notion of what it is to be a Muslim community, and then the reality that we all do. And the more you read about even the time of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and the community, there are all sorts of things that were going on there.
Right.
I was just reading one text that a man invited a woman to his house, and he went to the Prophet and told him, I did everything with her except have intercourse. And then the text just ends at that. Like, the Prophet didn't have an answer. He just remained silent. So I can imagine then that there were so many things happening in that community. I mean, even the whole story of Aisha, and how she was accused of adultery, and what happened even after the Prophet died, and the the rivalry among the companions, and we don't dwell into the human component of what it means to be a Muslim. We just think of, okay, this is you don't do this is haram, and that's Islam.
Right.
So I think that the discussions in the mosque should be more about the realities, like men deciding, not you, but what you're talking about, young men deciding that they can go ahead and live with and date non-Muslim women, but Muslim women are stuck not having anybody to have that respected courtship that you were talking about. There's now a big problem with that. Or having support systems with people who are suffering from addictive behavior. I don't see why mosques should not be the places where we have a support network for people who have problems, and even have, we invite either Alcoholics Anonymous or Sex Addictive Anonymous groups to come, and I'm sure there are Muslims within that group. It's just nobody wants to admit that.
No, absolutely there are, and we could. That's another way we could also do outreach, in our surrounding community by allowing others to join those support groups. But to your earlier point about the why men may go out and choose a non-Muslim woman, right? Well, we can see very clearly a direct correlation if we segregate our gender all the time between the men and the women, especially with our youth, and they don't get to know each other, they don't socialize with each other. What we've established is a pattern of behavior where the men are taught, do not get to know our females, right? I mean, that's what they're taught. You can't talk to them, you can't engage with them. So who do they get to know? Well, at Starbucks, they get to know the non-Muslim women. And that's okay, because nobody's regulating Starbucks. And so at the end of the day, then...
It's not good, you can never have any alcohol.
You can what?
You can never get any alcohol.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
You never get any alcohol in there.
Oh, well, but that's another issue. So, I'm not saying Starbucks is a bad place. What I'm saying is that we're setting up a pattern of behavior without ill intention. We're not ill-intended when we do this, but that's the consequence, right? The young men get socialized with women who are not of our own community. So what is a way we can change that? We can start deciding for ourselves what are healthy interactions, what do they look like, how can we set up, in some communities, right, they've had cotillions, right, which I'm not suggesting that we do because I don't know about the permissibility of dances and stuff, but what I'm saying is that they have, if we look at the Latino population, they have quinceañeras, right? There are different traditions we can create of our own doing that promote the values that we say we want to see. And that's how we do it, right? But we have the full range of creativity to do that. We're not, bound by, there's only one way of doing this.
The other thing is that, Mormons, they have, after high school, they go on a mission for 2 years. Yeah. Jews, some of them send their kids to a kibbutz in Israel. And whatever, however we want to look at that, I think their idea is they're trying to instill a sense of purpose in that young person. Right? And a lot of times I think kids are too young to go and jump right into college. So I think there's some kind of service-oriented programming that we should think about for mosques as well. For people that go from the youth group before they go to college, they do something or they do it while they're in college.
I mean, that's a great idea. I mean, and also because young men tend to also be a little bit more delayed sometimes in terms of what they want to do. Yeah. But a phenomenon we saw in the Midwest, the Nolby Foundation, which is almost non-existent now, but they used to plan trips that were educational trips with scholars, but everybody was allowed to go on it who could afford to come, and I think sometimes they even gave scholarships or something. But this was it wasn't the intention, but it was sort of a side result that young people would get to know each other while they were traveling. And what a great way to get to know each other, because traveling, you really get to know people, number one. And number two, there were adults there who were guides on the sides. They weren't hovering over them, but they were there enough so that nobody was trying any funny business, right? and there was a permissible environment to get to know people. People got married out of those trips. Things like that, promote the values that we say we have, but allow for that getting to know one another to happen.
Plug. We have February 16th to the 19th, the Muslim Youth Group is going on the ski trip. We do this every year, and it will be pretty much what Sister Heather is talking about, supervised, and we'll have lectures
people get married.
and fun things, and inshallah people will get married. Yeah.
I mean, being okay with younger marriages is another issue, right? In our community, one that I'm totally in favor of, because in Islam, a worst case scenario, divorce is permissible. And if we promote this value, then we need to promote it. That if we don't want to have sex out of marriage, then let's promote that value. And if kids are ready to get married, let them get married.
How young? How? I'm sorry, Mike. Just one last question. What do you think is too young for
So I'm going to leave that to an individual basis, right? That's how I'd assess for that. Like, where are they maturity-wise? Where do they see their values and understanding of marriage? Do they understand what marriage is? I of course promote premarital, counseling because it's really a necessity, I think. But I think I'd go on an individual by individual.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the youngness of being married and what's the appropriate time. Our society now, it takes so long for people to get on their feet financially that oftentimes people aren't ready until their 30s to really be able to make a living, to settle down. That's with a two-person income. Yet, biologically and psychologically, we have the urge to get married, much earlier. So there's this continuing disconnect, and obviously that's why people are living together before marriage, because they just can't afford to economically support it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's a societal trend that seems to be continuing. How do Muslims deal with that societal trend of delayed economic reality in terms of being financially stable versus the need really to get married at an earlier age? It's a difficult balance.
Absolutely, and a lot of parents promote that you shouldn't get married until you have those things in place. What I have responded, and others, not just myself, but I've heard others respond to that this way, which is, if you were going to pay for your child to go through college, right? You set aside the money for them to go through college. Why not support them and their spouse while they're both going through college? You were going to do it anyway, right? Why not allow them to have this halal living, while they're going through college, and have the support of that person when they're confronted with all of the challenges of college? That's where you get exposed to many of these things. Well, actually, it starts much earlier now, but you have the freedom in that space. And so why not, if you were going to support them anyway, what's wrong with supporting them and their spouse through that process?
I think most parents would probably be okay with that. I think it's the other side. I think it's the actual
the young people?
Young people that want to feel that they're independent before they get married. I think that's where the pushback may come from.
I don't know. Do the youth have anything to say about that? Yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry, we've got like a few. We'll come back over here in a second. Let's the women have a few questions.
I'm kind of a youth. I was just going to
share.
You're a youth.
Yes. Share a young person's perspective. I think that right now young people are kind of raised to think that they have to have everything together before we get married.
Yeah.
And I think that adults could probably come together and be better resources for young people in the early years of marriage, because it's confusing. And I don't think that marriages often fail just because of the challenge. but due to the lack of our support systems. And feeling like we can go to those support systems when we're challenged. I don't know why I'm shaking right now. So I think it's just changing the culture from the beginning and having more positive dialogue from parents to young people about relationships from a young age, so that we feel like when we do encounter those struggles that come up, we have people to go to and ask questions for. As a young person at the mosque today, I don't necessarily know who the best person is to go to here if I am struggling in my marriage. What systems have we set up? I know there's an online premarital counseling course, but we should really be investing more into those resources as adults, looking out for our young people from the beginning, in my opinion.
Well, I think behind you.
I just wanted to add to that as parents, we also need to be prepared. If our kids come to us and they say they want to get married and we think they're too young, we don't oppress them. Right. That's a huge sin in Islam, to tell your kids that they can't get married, because you're telling them you have to have a halal lifestyle, you have to get married, but then when they try to do that and you tell them no, that is a huge sin upon the parents. So if your kids do want to do something the halal way, you need to support them and put your ego aside. I think that's really important for parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can actually
not try to stop our kids because they want to marry someone of a different race, or whatever, or they're not rich, or how are they going to support you, or all of this dunya type things. I mean, I converted to Islam when I was a teenager. I met my husband a few years later, and we got married. And yeah, we were poor, but we've been married over 10 years. Alhamdulillah, we have 3 kids, and we're fine. I mean, it's okay to be poor when you first get married. That's normal. It's okay to be a student and be married. That's normal. So I think as parents, if our kids are young and they're ready to get married, we need to support them and not tell them, no, you need to buy a house first. No, you need to make this amount of money first, or no, you can only marry from this culture, whatever. So I think as parents, we need to be more flexible. We need to listen to our kids, and we need to be more supportive of our kids. And if they want to get married young, then we need to learn to support that decision.
Right, that's really important. And one of the things that we can do as parents is we don't have to wait for them to start talking to us about it, right? We can start the conversation. We know when puberty hits our children. At that point, when puberty hits, we can start talking to them about what's a natural feeling, what's a natural inclination. And when you feel it, and when you feel those urges, overwhelming you, or how to deal with that, how to express that, where's the space that that's a halal way of expressing it, right? And so we can start this conversation so that they have an open door, son or daughter, when you feel like you're ready to get married, please tell me. I'm happy to help you through that process, right? We don't have to wait for them to come to us. We can start the conversation.
We'll have 2 more questions and then we'll...
I think this man back here has been waiting for a while.
Assalamu alaikum. So just a couple, I need this. Just a couple, comments. So my husband and I have been married almost 10 years, got married in our early 20s, knew each other about 3 years before then. And we were lucky enough to, our nikah was done by Yahya Abdul Rahman. And one of the things he strongly suggested at that time was to do premarital counseling. And we did. We went to a couple sessions. And some of the things that I would say my husband and I still, think it definitely took the taboo out of certain things is, need and want. What's the difference? We're so caught up that we need a big house. We need to make 6 figures. We need to have this. We need to have all these things. But one of the lessons that we still have is that we actually grew up together. We went through the struggles together. And we learned from each other. We grew up together. And a lot of that stuff has been the foundation of our marriage. Now, mashallah, we have 2 crazy young kids, 6 and 2, driving us insane. But when we have a chance to have those conversations, have those date nights, have the opportunity to reconnect, it's definitely that, I would say from the beginning, we had a lot of those stuff, the taboos addressed. Divorce was addressed. We knew that it is not a bad decision. It's an important decision. It's a serious decision. And if at a time we are not good with each other, that we do not bring out the best in each other that make us good human beings, good Muslims, that is a conversation we would have. It's not taboo, it's discussed. If it ever would be appropriate, that conversation would come up again. But really, I would say that the foundation is, relatively young still, I hope, but many others is like, we're so caught up with our youngsters who are just, we need to have this, we need to have that, and really it's simplify, strip all the stuff of this dunya and focus on what's really needed. And if we support that from the foundation, I just think it's so much easier. It's not as complicated, or that question of, how old should I be when I get married? It really is an individual decision, but really the focus and what needs to be the priorities needs to be reestablished. I feel, to your earlier point about the collective, when we go to school, it's about being the individual. Well, I grew up in this mosque, and I remember I would come here and there was standing room only in this room. And now, look around. And it's part of the collective. It's part of how things have changed, how people are finding their own, they're making their own identity in the social media space. And we're not coming together as much. So 2 different points, but the last one does sadden me somewhat, because I think we have this wonderful venue and this opportunity to address things that you could say is taboo in a great environment, a safe environment where we could encourage honest communication.
So just to add to what you're saying, because it's such a great point, 2 points really I want to draw out from what you're saying. One is that struggle itself is not bad, right? You grow a lot and you grow together when you struggle. So that's actually a good thing for marriage. But apart from that, what you were talking about, what that sets up in our community, right, is that if things have to look a certain way for everybody, this has actually created a lot of problems in our families as well, right? Particularly in relationship to community. So people come out to interact with community and think that they have to look a certain way, they have to have a certain thing. And this has created problems for our families as well, by the way, because they always feel like they have to have a certain face for the community. And they can't be real, they can't be genuine, and that has created a lot of problems in our community. That is a real issue. And it hasn't served us. It hasn't served us at all. That's part of why you don't see people come, right? I can't live up to that expectation. I can't be myself. I'm sorry, brother, okay?
By the way, I think we'd like to make a list of all the guys who want to make 6-figure income before they get married. Especially
Okay. So as you are supportive for young marriage, so what about if they decided to have kids? So what is your opinion or your advice for this? They are getting,
like, should they wait or not? Is that the question?
Having kids, yeah.
Having kids,
you are a supporter of young marriage. So what about having kids?
Again, I would say that that's on an individual basis, but looking at your support network, right? Do you have the support system in place to support that? I knew a sister in another state who she wanted to go to law school. She got married young. She was 18 when she got married, and she and her husband were both in law school. They went to law school, and along the way she got pregnant with their first child. But she had a whole network of system support, right? She had grandparents on both sides of the family who were willing to step up and support her having children at that time. Now, if you have that kind of support system, what's wrong with it, right? If you don't, like my own situation, my husband and I are both converts. We don't have Muslim families. So we don't have that same extensive support network as someone else. I still had children when I was young, but it was a lot harder, right? So, you have to weigh, like, what support systems you have in place, and but I mean, I'm actually grateful I had them when I was younger, because I'm getting older now and I can't imagine starting now, personally.
Last question.
My daughter went to New Horizon School, and then she went to college. And of course, college was away from home, so she has her friends that are non-Muslims. And what I'm trying to visualize is that there are probably thousands of kids from New Horizons that are now professionals, young professionals, that are disconnected from the community. And I think what I'm hearing here is there isn't that tool to pull them back to the community. And I think that's what we need to focus on.
Right, and so we saw the rising up of, because the young people recognized this, right? Once they got beyond the MSA, there was nothing for them. There's a space of time between getting married and the MSA for some, where there's nothing. And so the young people in SoCal recognized that, right? They created that group, Mecca, Muslims engaged in community something, can't remember the last letter. But it's a pretty vibrant group. They get together, I think, monthly to socialize. They talk about the real topics, but it's an attempt to create an avenue for them to have a sense of community. It's unfortunately, it's not part of the mosque, right? But it's something that they saw a need for and they created. So there are some young people who see that need is there. We can provide the same thing here, right?
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Heather, for this good conversation. And this shows that I think we need to have